use the word pandemic would trigger panic.
A world in lockdown.
This is the Xi Jinping virus, the authoritarianism and the lack of press freedom in the mainland.
Tonight on 60 Minutes, Undercover,
Desirable to eat exotic and unusual animals.
where the coronavirus came from,
That's probably how the jump into humans.
and why this is only the beginning
You will see 60% of the population get infected.
of a new era
Is this virus more dangerous?
It is certainly more infective.
of the super virus.
This is Mother Nature's revenge.
Plus,
What's the secret?
I always say good lighting, good makeup, and good doctors.
Dolly's back,
Who's taking me to dinner after the show?
the Queen of Nashville, charming a whole new generation of fans.
I have young boys still whistling at me. I say I'm married, but I ain't dead.
I'm Tara Brown.
I'm Tom Steinford.
I'm Liz Hayes.
I'm Sarah Arbo.
I'm Liam Bartlett, and this is 60 Minutes. Good evening, and welcome to the program. The predictions about the catastrophe that is the coronavirus get more ominous by the day. The World Health Organization says it poses a greater global threat than terrorism. That's bad enough. But what the expert you're about to meet says is even more terrifying. Professor Gabriel Leung believes 60% of the world's population could become infected with the virus, and that as many as 45 million of us might be killed by it. Now, it'd be easy to dismiss the professor as alarmist, except he's the man who led the fight against the SARS virus. He knows what he's talking about. We ignore him at our peril. It's not a matter of if, but when Australia's streets will look like this.
It doesn't appear that any country has been completely successful at 100% containment and driving it back into the wild.
This is life for the 7 million people of Hong Kong, caught in the crosshairs of the coronavirus.
It frightens me. But I think that a little bit of anxiety will give you that extra bit of motivation to take precautions.
A world where people only venture out in masks, where almost all public places are deserted for fear of infection, where businesses are deserted and economic markets are in panic. And this may only be the start.
There is now an emergency going on, and what we must do is very rigorous infection control.
This is the new normal of possibly the greatest pandemic the world has ever seen. If coronavirus is the disease X the world has been fearing, then it possibly began somewhere like this, among a colony of bats.
There's sleeping time bombs across the region right now.
And then somehow the virus almost certainly crossed over to humans at so-called wet markets. These are places all over Asia, but particularly China, where wild animals are slaughtered on site and sold for food.
I think this is Mother Nature's revenge.
Stephen Galster is an environmental and human rights investigator who's been campaigning for years against Asia's wet markets. Governments throughout the region claim they've shut them down because of the coronavirus pandemic. But here in Bangkok, as you'll see, we're about to go undercover to show that's simply untrue. Stephen is fighting the coronavirus at its very source.
To contain, to delay, to research, and then to mitigate.
While this man is leading the scientific fight against the pandemic at emergency World Health Organization meetings all around the world.
1.5% of that 100-person cluster has asymptomatic shedding of a live virus. So
Professor Gabriel Leung is considered the world's foremost expert on coronavirus. Based in Hong Kong, he led the global fight against SARS.
At first, we heard rumors about a new, mysterious, atypical pneumonia sort of brewing on the mainland.
Was there much fright in those days? Was there?
Of course. It was very scary.
No end in sight to the SARS crisis.
The SARS death toll continues to rise.
In November 2002, SARS rampaged through 17 countries, infecting over 8,000 people and killing nearly 800. Experts say that's just a hint of what this latest coronavirus could do.
It is certainly more infective. So, and it's also very difficult to try to control it.
And coronavirus, or COVID-19, as the illness is now being called, spreads far more rapidly than SARS. Unchecked, as countries like China and South Korea have discovered, the infection rate becomes exponential.
The big unknown now is really how big is the iceberg?
So you're guessing there could be many, many more people?
I don't know, but I'm suspecting that.
Coronavirus has already struck over 80 countries and counting. Professor Leung's prediction for the eventual extent of the pandemic is chilling. From everything you've learnt over the past weeks and months, what is your best estimate of how many people around the world could be affected by this virus?
Don't know. Everybody is susceptible. And if you assume that everybody randomly mix with each other, then eventually you will see 40, 50, 60% of the population get infected.
At current mortality rates, that level of infection would mean between 45 and 60 million deaths worldwide. And that's just in the first wave of the virus, despite the desperate, draconian lockdown measures being used in China. Is the second wave worse than the first wave, do you think?
Don't know, but we have to prepare for that possibility that there is a second wave.
As a person and a scientist, does this virus frighten you?
Every time I'm involved in an epidemic, it frightens me.
As Australia now prepares to be hit by the first wave of coronavirus, it's worth looking at the effect it has had on infected cities like Hong Kong, so close to the epicentre of the outbreak. I can tell you in all the years I've been coming here, this is not normal. This is one of Hong Kong's busiest market streets, and at this time of the day, it is always packed, jammed, teeming, shoulder to shoulder with tourists and shoppers. But this is a product of what public health officials call social distancing. If you don't have to be on the street, if you don't have a good reason, most of these people are going to the subway on either end, then simply stay home. All over Hong Kong, the impacts of this city battling its deadly, unseen enemy are everywhere. Shopping malls deserted. Amusement parks shut down or attended by the very few. Mandatory temperature checks before entering restaurants. You do this to all the customers, do you?
Yeah. Okay, your temperature is 34.7 degrees.
And once inside, Perspex screens to shield the patrons. On the streets, the elderly line up for free handouts of masks and hand sanitizer. Most shops are selling little else. And where people are forced to congregate, like the subway system, everyone wears a mask. The people of Hong Kong have accepted the new world of the coronavirus. Don't have much choice really, but this is the reality if you're in close proximity. Has been for weeks now since the outbreak began across the border in China. The question is, are Australians ready and willing to take the extreme measures necessary to avoid infection? With so many people here on the streets wearing masks, can you see the same sort of culture being played out on the streets of Australia?
Hong Kongers have lived through SARS, and one of the first things they did was go out and buy masks. There's been a month-long shortage of them ever since.
Tom Grundy is editor of Hong Kong Free Press and a long-time resident who doubts whether populations in Australia and other Western countries will respond to coronavirus in the unified way people here have.
Of course, yeah, people are very disciplined about keeping this virus under control. Goodness knows how, you know, other perhaps less disciplined places who haven't lived through something like this are going to cope.
But according to Tom, there's a much darker dimension to the coronavirus outbreak. He says there's deep suspicion here that a major reason it became a pandemic is a massive state cover-up ordered by China's President Xi Jinping, including arresting the whistleblowing doctor who later died.
This is the Xi Jinping virus, not the cause of it, but certainly the breadth of the outbreak is because of the authoritarianism and the lack of press freedom in the mainland. There was no mechanism for anyone to raise the alarm about this. The one doctor, you know, who tried to in the early days and ultimately succumbed to the disease was detained and told to shut up.
Public health crises and closed, secretive governments don't really go together, do they?
Right. They've even admitted that, you know, they've changed the way they collect data a couple of times. So it's very, very tough.
Do you think the death toll numbers that they're reporting are accurate?
There is a lot of pressure in China for things to get back to normal. The economy is suffering. So I think, you know, it would be reasonable to think that there is some malarkey with the figures. But, you know, it's a black box.
We are in uncharted territory.
One measure of China's influence is the pressure it has put on the World Health Organization to not officially call the coronavirus outbreak a pandemic. But on that front, the man at the center of it is blunt. Why is there a blockage with that? Why was the WHO reluctant to call it a pandemic?
Well, technically it is. I suspect that it may be because colleagues may think that if they will use the word pandemic, then it would trigger panic. And panic is no good for any kind of outbreak control.
How was this virus born? What was the mechanism that gave birth to it?
Probably a zoonotic jump, that is from a small mammal, likely reared or captured at least for food consumption. The reservoir appears to be a bat.
Coming up, undercover.
Pangolins have been high on the menu for a while.
In an illegal wildlife market.
Highest risk during the handling process.
Is this where the coronavirus
Jump from an animal to a person.
was born?
That's the lesson here.
That's next on 60 Minutes.